The civil rights movement was a time of sacrifice and struggle for all generations of African Americans. This was a time when leaders from within the African American community and beyond rose to claim their rights and justice. These brave people included Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, among many others. All risked and many lost their lives, all in the name of freedom and equality. Civil rights reform usually began with a small-scale protest that ultimately resulted in the upbringing of new, more aggressive movements, leaders, and organizations. The beginning of larger-scale black protest activity began on December 1st, 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white bus rider in the Montgomery, Alabama. Her jail sentence erupted a black community boycott of the city's buses. The year-long boycott really demonstrated the unity and determination of Alabama's Negroes and inspired others elsewhere. The boycott's movement's most effective leader, MLK, understood the larger significance of the boycott and approached the issue with the non-violent tactics used by Mahatma Gandhi for Southern blacks to gain their rights and equality. In turn of the Montgomery movement, a new regional organization rose in 1957. It became the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with Martin Luther King as its president and spokesperson. In early 1960, a new generation represented by 4 freshmen at North Carolina College began a wave of student sit-ins in efforts to end segregation at lunch counters in the South. These protests spread quickly throughout the South and led to the funding of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee 2 months after. This younger, student-led group was more aggressive in its use of nonviolent direct action tactics than King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The younger people stressed the development of autonomous local movements as compared to King and his followers' strategy of using local campaigns to achieve national civil rights reforms. By the late 1960s, all these African American organizations faced quite strong challenges from new violent organizations like the Black Panther Party. There were major riots as a result. The intense infighting within the black militant community, the government oppression, and the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King caused a decline in the protest activity in the late 1960s. The African American freedom struggle still left a permanent mark on what American society is today. Apparent forms of racial discrimination and government-supported segregation of public facilities ended. Also, anti-black violence declined in the South. Black candidates were beginning to get elected to political offices in communities where blacks had not even been permitted to vote. Although in fact, as opposed to by right, segregation continued in northern as well as southern public school systems and in other areas of American society despite the civil rights gains. For the most part, it was all the younger generations of people who began leading the way in organizing the movements such as the sit-ins and the desegregation of schools. But at the time when these movements went into effect, it was when all generations of Americans interacted together for a future with justice. After all, it was the older generations who let the younger generations' fight become a victory. It was the older generations that with the politicians that passed the laws and the people who controlled who enrolled in schools, for example.